Paradise lost or just forgotten. Imagine the Australian coastline in the 1950s. Families packed into Holdens, driving hours along dusty roads to reach the newest holiday paradise. The air smelled of salt and opportunity. Developers promised luxury and modern amenities. Councils promised prosperity and jobs that would never disappear. Investors promised returns that would last for generations. For a decade or two, some of these places delivered exactly that promise. The hotels filled every summer. The shops all thrived. Children grew up believing the boom was permanent. The future looked golden, but empires built on sand rarely survived the first storm. Today, when you drive through these 10 locations, you will find crumbling motels with smashed windows, swimming pools filled with dirt and debris, main streets where the only sound is wind rattling through abandoned shop fronts and the occasional echo of what once was. These were not small failures. These were Australia's holiday capitals, places that appeared in travel magazines and in glossy brochures, places that politicians visited to cut ribbons and make promises about endless prosperity. Now they are ruins. The question is not whether they failed. The question is why Australia let them fall so far, and whether the same fate awaits the towns we visit today. This is not a story about nostalgia. This is about economic reality, environmental reckoning, and the brutal truth that holiday destinations have expiry dates. Welcome to the rise and ruin of 10 places that were once the pride of Australian tourism. We listen to your requests for honest regional analysis. Today, we examine what really happened when the crowd stopped coming. Wittenoom, the town built on death's start with the most infamous collapse in Australian history. Wittenoom in Western Australia was not originally a holiday town. It was a mining settlement built around blue asbestos in the 1940s. By the early 60s, it had become something else entirely. Families moved there for work. The population peaked at around 20,000 people. There were schools, churches, a hospital, and the Wittenoom Gorge nearby, which became a tourist attraction. The gorge was stunning. Red rock formations, crystal clear pools. Tourists drove from Perth to see it, and the town marketed itself as a gateway to the Pilbara's natural beauty. But the asbestos killed that dream faster than any economic downturn ever could. By the late 70s, medical evidence was undeniable. Blue asbestos caused mesothelioma. Workers were dying. Their families were dying. The mine closed in 1966, but the contamination remained in every building, every road, every gust of wind. The government tried to relocate residents. Most left. A handful refused. By 2007, Wittenoom was officially degazetted. It no longer existed on maps. The government removed it from road signs, cut power and water, and condemned every structure. Today, if you ignore the warnings and drive to Wittenoom, you will find a ghost town in the truest sense. Buildings still stand, their weathered facades testament to lives once lived. But they are death traps. The asbestos fibers remain airborne with every gust of wind. The gorge is still beautiful, the rock formations still stunning, but no tourism board will ever promote it again. This is not abandonment by choice. This is a town that killed its own future, one breath at a time. And the lesson is clear. Natural beauty means nothing if the ground beneath it is toxic. Port Arthur. When history becomes too heavy. Tasmania's port. Arthur is still a major tourist site, but the ruins tell a story of a very different kind of collapse. This was never a holiday town in the traditional sense. It was a convict settlement built in 1830, designed to break the spirits of repeat offenders. The location was deliberate. Surrounded by shark-infested waters on the Tasman Peninsula, escape was nearly impossible. For decades, it functioned as one of the British Empire's harshest prisons. When the convict system ended in 1877, Port Arthur had a chance to reinvent itself. It became a small town. Timber mills opened. Families moved in. For a brief period, it was just another Tasmanian community trying to make a living from the land. But the prison ruins remained, and by the early 20th century, tourists started arriving to see them. The ruins became the drawcard. By the 1970s, Port Arthur was being marketed as a historical attraction, a window into Australia's brutal colonial past. Then came April 1996. A lone gunman killed 35 people at the historic site in what remains the worst mass shooting in Australian history. The massacre changed everything. The site closed temporarily. When it reopened, the narrative shifted. It was no longer just about convict history, it was about national trauma. Visitor numbers dropped sharply in the years immediately after. The town of Port Arthur, which had relied almost entirely on tourism, struggled. Some businesses closed, the population dwindled. Today, Port Arthur attracts visitors again, but it is a different kind of tourism. People come to pay respects at the Memorial Garden. They come to understand the history. But the light-hearted holiday atmosphere that once existed is gone forever. The ruins are still there, but they carry a weight that no tourism campaign can lift. This is what happens when a place becomes synonymous with tragedy. The infrastructure survives, but the spirit of the destination dies. Silverton, the outback mirage that almost was drive 25 kilometres west of Broken Hill in New South Wales, and you will reach Silverton. In 1883, this was one of the richest silver mining towns in Australia. The population exploded to over 3,000 people. There were hotels, shops, a school, a post office, and a sense that Silverton would rival Broken Hill as a regional powerhouse. But the silver ran out faster than anyone predicted. By 1889, most of the mines had closed. The population collapsed to fewer than 100 people almost overnight. For most of the 20th century, Silverton was a genuine ghost town. A few stubborn families remained, but the main street was mostly empty buildings and dust. Then in the 1970s and 80s, something unexpected happened. Film crews discovered Silverton. The landscape was perfect for outback scenes. Mad Max 2 was filmed nearby. A town like Alice used the town as a location. Suddenly, Silverton had a new identity. It became a cult destination for film fans and photographers. Local business owners tried to capitalize. The Silverton Hotel reopened and marketed itself as the pub from the movies. Art galleries opened in old buildings. A small museum displayed mining history. For a while, it worked. Tourists came in decent numbers, especially international visitors doing outback road trips. But here is the problem. Silverton is in the middle of nowhere. There is no reason to stay overnight. There are no luxury accommodations. The summer heat is unbearable. Visitors stop for an hour, take photos, buy a beer, and leave. Today, Silverton survives, but barely. The permanent population is around 50 people. Most buildings are still abandoned. The film tourism has slowed as newer movies choose other locations. The town is not quite dead, but it is not thriving either. It exists in a strange limbo, too iconic to fade completely, but too remote to ever grow. This is the fate of places that rely entirely on novelty. Once the novelty wears off, nothing else holds the crowds. Farina, the oasis that turned to dust. In the late 1800s, Farina in South Australia was supposed to be the agricultural hub of the far north. It sat on the old Garn railway line, and investors believed the surrounding land could be farmed despite the harsh desert climate. By 1910, Farina had a population of 600. There were 2 hotels, a bakery, a general store, a post office, a police station, and an underground bakery that used the cool earth to keep bread fresh in the extreme heat. Tourists began visiting Farina in the early 20th century because of the railway. The Garn passed through town, and passengers would disembark to stretch their legs and see the famous underground bakery. For a brief period, Farina marketed itself as a stopover destination for travellers heading north to to Alice Springs. But the agricultural dream never materialized. The soil was too poor. Droughts were too frequent. By the 1920s, most farmers had abandoned their land. The town struggled on until 1967, when the Garn Railway was rerouted. The new line bypassed Farina entirely. Without the railway, there was no reason for anyone to stop. The remaining businesses closed within months. The last residents left by the early 70s. Farina became a ruin. Today, the Farina Restoration Group works to preserve what is left. Volunteers camp on site and repair buildings using traditional methods. But this is preservation, not revival. No one lives in Farina. No businesses operate. Tourists visit to see the ruins, but they do not stay. The underground bakery is still there, a reminder of ambition that was never realistic. The town died because it was built in a place that could never sustain it. And the lesson is this: infrastructure alone does not create a destination. The environment must cooperate, and in Farina, it never did. Cossack, the pearling town that lost its shine. On the northwest coast of Western Australia, near Roebourne, sits Cossack. In the 1870s, this was the pearling capital of Australia. Divers from Japan, Malaysia, and China came to work the oyster beds. The town boomed. By 1890, Cossack had a population of over 2,000. There were stone buildings, a post office, a courthouse, hotels, and a thriving port. The pearls were sold internationally, and Cossack was wealthy. But cyclones battered the town repeatedly throughout the late 1800s. The worst hit in 1898, destroying the port infrastructure and many of the stone buildings that had seemed so permanent. The pearling industry began to decline as oyster stocks were overfished and the beds depleted. Then, in 1904, the railway reached Roebourne instead of Cossack. Shipping traffic moved to the new port. Within a decade, Cossack was in terminal decline. By the 1950s, it was abandoned. In the 1970s, the Western Australian government recognised Cossack's historical value and began restoration. Some buildings were repaired. A small museum opened. For a while, there was talk of turning Cossack into a heritage tourism destination. A few tourists came, mostly history enthusiasts and photographers attracted by the stone ruins against the coastal backdrop. But the isolation killed any chance of mass tourism. Cossack is hours from the nearest city. There are no hotels. The heat is extreme. The restored buildings sit mostly empty. Today, Cossack is a ruin with a visitor centre that is rarely staffed. A handful of people live nearby, but the town itself is dead. The pearling industry that built it is long gone, and no new economy has replaced it. This is what happens when a single industry collapses and nothing else exists to catch the fall. Cossack had its moment, and that moment ended over a century ago. Ravenswood, gold rush ghosts in Queensland. In the 1860s, gold was discovered near Ravenswood in North Queensland. Within a decade, the town had exploded to over 5,000 people. It was one of the richest goldfields in the state. There were over 30 hotels, banks, schools, and even an opera house. Ravenswood was not just a mining camp. It was a proper town with ambitions to become a regional capital. The gold lasted longer than in many other rush towns. Mines operated into the early 20th century, but by the 1920s, the easy gold was gone. The population began to shrink. By the 1950s, Ravenswood was nearly deserted. A few families stayed, mostly farmers and cattle grazers. The grand buildings fell into ruin. In the 1990s, there was a brief revival. A new mining company reopened some of the old gold mines using modern techniques. The population grew slightly, reaching a few hundred. The historic buildings were stabilised, and a small tourism industry emerged. Visitors came to see the National Trust listed courthouse and the old railway station. But the mining company eventually closed again. The workers left. Today, Ravenswood has a permanent population of around 70 people. The ruins remain and tourists still visit, but it is a trickle, not a flood. The town survives on history alone, and that is not enough to sustain growth. Ravenswood is a ghost town that refuses to die completely, but it will never return to its glory days. The gold is gone, and with it, the reason the town existed in the first place. Hill End, the artist colony built on ruins. Hill End in New South Wales had the largest gold nugget ever found in Australia. The Holterman nugget, discovered in 1872, weighed over 280 kilograms. At its peak, Hill End had a population of 8,000 people. It rivaled Bathurst as a regional centre. There were churches, hotels, a hospital, theatres, and grand stone buildings that suggested permanence. But the gold ran out by the 1890s. The population collapsed to fewer than 100 within 2 decades. Most buildings were abandoned. For half a century, Hill End was a ghost town, visited only by fossickers hoping to find overlooked gold. Then in the 1960s, artists discovered it. The light was perfect. The ruins were photogenic. The isolation was inspiring. Painters and photographers started buying up old buildings for almost nothing. The New South Wales government recognised the potential and declared Hill End a historic site. Some buildings were restored. A museum opened. By the 1980s, Hill End had reinvented itself as an artist retreat and heritage tourism destination. Visitors came to see the ruins, visit galleries, and experience the quiet of a town frozen in time. But this is not a revival in the traditional sense. Hill End still has fewer than 200 permanent residents. There are no major hotels. The economy is fragile, surviving on weekend tourists from Sydney and government heritage grants. The ruins are the attraction, and they will remain ruins. No one is rebuilding Hill End into a functioning town. It exists as a preserved memory, a place where the past is monetized just enough to keep the lights on. Adaminaby, the town that drowned. In 1957, the New South Wales government decided to build the Snowy Mountains hydroelectric scheme. One of the dams required flooding a valley, and the town of Adaminaby sat directly in the flood zone. The government offered compensation and relocated the town to higher ground a few kilometres away. But not everything moved. The old town, including the cemetery, churches, and many homes, was submerged under Lake Yucumbene. For a while, New Adaminaby thrived. It sat on the highway to the Snowy Mountain ski resorts. Tourists stopped for fuel, food, and accommodation. The town marketed itself as the gateway to the snowfields. Motels were built. Cafes opened. For 2 decades, Adaminaby had a steady tourist economy. But in the 1980s, the highway was upgraded and a bypass was built. Traffic no longer flowed through the centre of town. Tourists drove straight past. The motels emptied. Businesses closed. By the 2000s, Adaminaby was struggling. The population had dropped to fewer than 300. Half the shop fronts on the main street were vacant. Today, old Adaminaby remains underwater, visible only during droughts when the lake drops. New Adaminaby survives, but barely. A giant trout statue was erected to attract tourists, but it has not reversed the decline. The town is a victim of infrastructure decisions made decades ago. The bypass killed it as surely as the dam drowned the original settlement. And the lesson is this: towns that rely entirely on through traffic are always one road project away from irrelevance. Innes National Park, the resort that nature reclaimed. At the tip of South Australia's Yorke Peninsula lies Innes National Park. In the early 20th century, this area was home to a gypsum mining town called Inniston. The mine employed dozens of workers, and a small settlement grew up around it. But the mine closed in the 1930s, and the town was abandoned. In the 1970s, a developer had a vision. The coastline was stunning. The beaches were pristine. The location was remote enough to feel exclusive. Plans were drawn up for a luxury resort. Foundations were poured. Roads were graded. Marketing materials were printed. Investors were found. For a brief moment, it looked like Inniston would be reborn as a high-end holiday destination. But the developer ran out of money. The resort was never completed. The partially built structures were left to the elements. In 1970, the area was declared a national park, and all development ceased. Today, you can walk through the ruins of Inniston and see the remains of the mining town and the failed resort. Concrete slabs sit in the scrub. Rusted machinery slowly disappears under vegetation. The beaches are still beautiful, but no hotels line the shore. This is a rare example of a ruin that is celebrated rather than mourned. The national park designation saved the coastline from overdevelopment, but it also serves as a reminder that not every beautiful location can support mass tourism. Accessibility, water supply, and environmental sensitivity all matter. Inniston failed twice, first as a mine, then as a resort. Nature won both times. Cassilis, the village that couldn't compete. Cassilis in the Upper Hunter region of New South Wales was never a major holiday destination, but in the mid-20th century, it tried to position itself as a rural getaway. The town sits on the Castlereagh River, and in the 1950s and 60s, families from Sydney and Newcastle would drive up for weekends of fishing, camping, and quiet country life. A few small motels operated. The pub was always full on weekends. The town had a population of around 500, but over time, other regional towns invested in better facilities. Mudgee developed a wine tourism industry. Scone marketed itself for horse studs. Merriwa focused on agribusiness. Cassilis did nothing. The motels did not upgrade. The pub did not modernise. By the 1990s, tourists stopped coming. The motels closed. The town population dropped below 200. Today, Cassilis is not quite a ghost town, but it is close. The pub still operates, serving locals and the occasional passing traveller. But the main street is mostly empty. Several buildings are boarded up. There is no tourism economy. The town survives on farming alone, and even that is declining as properties consolidate into larger operations run by fewer people. Cassilis is a warning. It is not enough to have natural beauty or a convenient location. Towns must invest, adapt, and offer something competitors do not. Cassilis failed to do that, and now it exists in slow-motion decline. Too small to die outright, but too stagnant to ever recover. The pattern behind the ruins. What connects these 10 places is not bad luck. It is a failure to adapt when the original reason for existence disappeared. Wittenoom was built on asbestos. When the health risks became undeniable, the town had nothing else. Farina was built on farming that never worked. Cossack was built on pearls that ran out. Ravenswood and Hill End were built on gold that was finite. Adaminaby was bypassed by a highway. Cassilis simply stopped trying. The Australian landscape is littered with these ruins because we built too quickly and abandoned too easily. Investors chased short-term profits. Governments supported developments without real long-term plans. And when it all ended, no one wanted to pay for the cleanup or the transition. But here is the uncomfortable truth. The coastal towns we visit today face the same risks. Climate change is raising sea levels. Extreme weather events are becoming more frequent. Water supplies are under pressure. The infrastructure that supports mass tourism is aging. And if history teaches us anything, it is this. When the conditions change, the crowds will leave, and the ruins will remain. Should we mourn these 10 places, or should we learn from them? The answer is both. They deserve to be remembered for what they were, but they also serve as warnings for what we risk becoming if we do not plan better. What do you think? Are these ruins a tragic loss, or were they inevitable failures? Should more be done to preserve these sites, or should we let nature reclaim them? Share your thoughts in the comments. We value informed discussion in our community. Do not forget to rate this video and subscribe for more honest regional analysis. Thank you for watching. Stay curious.